There's a level of discipline that makes people around you speak more quietly. Not because you're loud, but because you no longer negotiate with yourself. And today you'll learn how one man in Tokugawa-era Japan built that kind of discipline, and how you can build it too without being chosen. Have you ever met people who don't fall off? Who do what must be done on any day, in the cold, in exhaustion, in chaos, without holding internal negotiations, while everyone else explains their failures with genetics, luck, and bad timing? They simply show up and do the work. And you know what people say about them? He got lucky. It's easier for him. He's a different breed. But there's a truth most people don't want to admit. You pay for that kind of resilience. And the price isn't motivation. The price is subtraction. In Japan, there lived a ronin still surrounded by legend, Miyamoto Musashi, a strategist and a master of the path, with countless stories told about him. And here's the trap. Musashi's method doesn't make you stronger by adding habits and techniques. It makes you stronger by subtracting excuses, dependencies, and escape routes. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, hit like, and write one thing in the comments. Which weakness in discipline annoys you the most? Procrastination, relapses, lazy mornings, or I don't keep my word? Your comment is your first public mark, and publicity changes the game. Now, to the story. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Always Started. It happened in a castle town on the edge of the domain, when peace was already called peace. Wars had faded, but people still lived on the razor's edge of poverty. The young man's name was Renziro, a carpenter's son. Not a samurai, not a noble, just a guy with hands that could hold a sword if his mind would stop betraying him. Renziro loved starting. He would start waking before dawn, and 5 days later he'd be sleeping until noon again. He would start running along the rice fields, and by the second week he'd convince himself it's not the season. He would start learning calligraphy, and quit when the brush stopped obeying him. On the outside he looked normal. On the inside he was a marketplace. Every day he bargained with himself. One morning he was carrying boards on his shoulder to his father's workshop. The road was slick after the night rain. On the bridge he saw an old man slip and fall straight into the mud, trying to lift a basket of charcoal. Renziro stopped, and didn't go. Not because he was cruel, but because bargaining instantly began in his head. I'll be late. Father will explode. It's not my problem. Someone else will help. The old man got up on his own, fell twice, got up again. And nearby stood a boy of about 8, the old man's son, looking at Renziro as if he'd just learned for the first time that adults can be empty too. Renziro made it to the workshop, but his hands were shaking. That evening he wanted to forget, like always, but at night he woke up with one thought. If there had been a fire on that bridge, or an enemy, would I have stood there bargaining too? That was the first crack. Not in his strength, in his self-justifications. In public he could smile, joke, say, yeah, it's fine. But at home, when his father fell asleep over his tools and his mother silently mended clothes, Renziro felt that his normal was just a quiet defeat. He wasn't a weak body. He was a weak decision. Strength came in waves, like it does for everyone. But consistency didn't exist at all. And the scariest part, he started getting used to it. Used to the sentence that kills destinies without blood. That's just how I am. When he remembered the bridge, what burned him wasn't that he didn't help. What burned him was that he found a beautiful explanation for himself. And he realized, if a person always has an explanation, they will never have discipline. The next day he heard talk at the market. A wandering warrior had arrived in town, unlike the others. The elders whispered, "It's Musashi, the one." And Renziro suddenly understood. If he kept living the way he lived, his life would end before his body died. He would become a man who, someday, wanted to be strong. So he went looking not for motivation. He went looking for a man who would not allow him to explain his weakness. And what he would see by the river would be his first real slap. Chapter 2. The Man with No Excuses. Renziro found him not in a tea house, and not in a hall for show fights. He found him by the river, where children usually train, playing with sticks. On the bank stood a man of average height, with a face that didn't ask for respect. It demanded silence. He held a wooden sword as if it wasn't an object, but an extension of breathing. Nearby lay a basket of stones and a simple bowl of rice. Renziro approached and bowed. "Sir, my name is Renziro. I want discipline. I want to become a man who doesn't break." The warrior didn't even turn around. "You don't want discipline," he said. "You want relief from shame. Those are different things." Renziro swallowed. I start and I quit. I bargain with myself. I hate it." Now the warrior looked at him. "Then listen. Discipline is not fire. Fire burns fast and dies fast. Discipline is stone. You don't see it until it becomes a wall." Renziro wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where do I start? How many times? How long? But the warrior raised a finger, as if stopping the noise before it even appeared. "You've already lost," he said, "because you came for a method, not for emptiness. A method is what you add. Emptiness is what you remove." He gave his name simply, Musashi. Later historians would argue about the details of his biography, but one thing is clear. Musashi is linked to the tradition of Niten Ichiryu, the principle of two swords as one intent. And Musashi's image and path are still discussed as a mix of fact and legend. Renziro had heard that Musashi despised decoration, in battle and in life. He didn't wear discipline like jewelry. He used it like a knife to cut away the excess. "You think I'm going to teach you to pull yourself together?" Musashi said. "No, I'm going to teach you to build your day so you can't fall apart." Renziro felt cold run down his spine, because it sounded like a sentence on his old freedom. "I will teach you," Musashi said, "if you agree to one condition. You stop saying, 'I'll try.' What do I say instead?" Musashi lifted the wooden sword and sliced the air once. Short, without beauty, without theater. "You will do the same thing, every day, at the same time, with no gaps, and you will do it as if your life depends on one strike." Renziro felt relief. "That's it. Finally, clarity." But Musashi continued. "And one more thing. You'll do it publicly, with witnesses, because as long as your promises live only in your head, they're worth nothing." Renziro wanted to object, wanted to say, "This is stupid, this is too much." But he remembered the bridge, he remembered the boy's eyes, and he nodded. "Tomorrow before dawn," Musashi said, "you'll come here and bring a rope." "A rope? Why?" Musashi didn't smile. "To tie yourself to your promise, not as a metaphor, for real." And Renziro understood. He hadn't come to learn strikes. He had come to learn how to have no exit. But he still didn't know the first strike wouldn't be aimed at wood. It would be aimed at his ego. Chapter 3. The vow that closes doors. Before dawn the air was cold, like water from a well. Renziro came to the river with the rope, as ordered. But Musashi didn't come alone. With him were 3 people, the local elder, the master blacksmith, and a young messenger boy. Witnesses. Ordinary people. The ones you're most ashamed to lie in front of. Musashi placed a small wooden plaque and a brush on the ground. "Write." "Write what?" "Who you are becoming," Musashi answered. "Not what you will do, but who you are." Renziro lowered the brush and wrote, "I am a man who trains one strike every morning before dawn. 90 days, no gaps." Musashi nodded. "Sign it and show them." The elder read it and snorted. 90 days? That's ambitious." The blacksmith smirked. "Kid, you can't stick to anything for a week." The boy stared with awe, as if it were madness. And here was the main thing. Renziro felt that retreat would hurt more than effort. Because now this wasn't a thought. It was a mark on wood. It was people's eyes. Modern psychology describes a similar mechanism through pre-committed if-then decisions. When the situation arrives, the action happens almost automatically. But Musashi didn't speak psychology. He spoke simpler. When you leave the door half open, your mind will look for a crack every day. Musashi took the rope. He tied one end to a wooden stake on the bank, the other to Renziro's belt. "Now," he said, "you won't leave until you do what you wrote." "This is humiliating." "No, this is medicine for your lies," Musashi replied. He demonstrated one strike, a simple horizontal cut. "You will do 1,000. Not pretty, correct? Slow. So the body remembers." Renziro raised the sword. The first strike was crooked. The second was worse. By the 20th, he wanted to rip the rope out and leave. By the 50th, his shoulders burned. By the 100th, his mind began to whisper, "Enough, you started. That's already a win." Musashi snapped a stick against the ground. "Hear that? That's your old voice. It doesn't say quit, it says cut it shorter, because shortening is a soft form of betrayal." On the 400th strike, Renziro felt something strange. The body began to move without discussion. His hands found the path by themselves. His breathing leveled out on its own. And Musashi said a sentence Renziro would remember forever. "Discipline begins where choice ends." When the 1,000 was done, Musashi untied the rope. "Tomorrow again, and the next day, and on the day you get sick, and on the day they invite you to drink sake." When Renziro came home after the first 1,000 strikes, his hands shook so much he couldn't hold a cup properly. His father looked and smirked. "Found yourself a new game." Renziro wanted to answer sharply, wanted to prove something, but he remembered Musashi's words, "Explanations are food for weakness." And he stayed silent. At night, he woke from pain in his forearms. His mind offered a compromise. "Rest tomorrow. You won't die." And for the first time, he noticed how crafty the mind is. It sounds caring when it wants to quit. Renziro got up, did 3 strikes at the threshold, just to show himself, "I don't negotiate," and lay back down. He didn't yet know that tiny action at night would save him later. Chapter 4. The Iron Hour. On the 3rd day, Renziro came earlier, and he saw Musashi already standing on the bank, as if he never slept. "Today you'll learn the dumbest question that destroys discipline," Musashi said. "When?" Renziro didn't understand. Musashi continued. "While you decide when, you spend strength on negotiations. You pay for the decision before the action." He pointed toward a temple bell in the distance. "In some places the bell rings the same way every day, and nobody asks, 'Maybe later?' Because later is like a weed. Leave it once, and it fills the whole field." "But I have work, a family. I can't every day." Musashi raised an eyebrow. "Tell me honestly. You can't, or you don't want to pay the price. Choose an hour. One, fixed, not convenient, safe from excuses. Before dawn, because the world is still quiet. And silence is the absence of your excuses." Renziro chose the hardest moment, when his skin still remembered sleep. Musashi accepted. "Good. Now this hour is not training time. This hour is your identity." Then he did something strange. He forbade Renziro from thinking about how the training went. You evaluate, and you bargain again. Today was bad, so it's pointless. That's poison. Your job is to show up. Do it. Leave. No theater. This resembles what habit studies tie to stable context. Repeating in the same place and at the same time helps behavior lock in. Musashi added, "You're not building strength, you're building inevitability." Musashi made him carve 2 characters into a small wooden plate. B. Inevitable, and Jin, now. "Hang it above where you sleep," he said. "Not as decoration. As a reminder, discipline lives in the present." By day 21, Renziro noticed another effect. Mornings felt longer. Not by the clock, by the feeling. When you wake up earlier than your excuses, the day feels like it belongs to you. But then a new hit came. A neighbor asked him to help with paid labor. If he agreed, he'd have to wake even earlier, even heavier. If he refused, the family would lose money. Renziro went to Musashi hoping to hear, "Fine, today you can." And he saw the mentor already understood by his face. "Here it is," Musashi said. "The day discipline meets real life. And now you'll learn. The iron hour exists not for ideal weeks. It exists for days like this. Renziro nodded, and for the first time he chose the harder path, without drama, without heroics. He simply chose. But then something else happened. Renziro found a new way to bargain. He stopped arguing about when and started arguing about what. That's why the next chapter is about what kills discipline faster than laziness. Variety. Chapter 5. One form. Variety is not freedom, Musashi said. Variety is cracks. He explained on his fingers. Every time you change the form of practice, you choose again, and choice is your old disease. Renziro wanted to argue, but doesn't mastery require learning many techniques? Musashi nodded. It does, but not at the beginning. First, you need to become a man who can repeat the same thing 1,000 times and not break. He placed 5 stones in front of Renziro. Today you'll do the same strike, but every 100th strike you'll move 1 stone from the left pile to the right. Not to count, to see you're not in a trance, you're on a path. Renziro began. At the 200th strike, thoughts became thick. At the 400th, anger arrived. Why so slow? Why so boring? At the 600th, despair. I'm wasting my life on 1 strike. Musashi listened in silence. And only at the 800th he said, this is where most people run, because this is where the ego that wants quick victories dies. If you endure, it won't get harder. It gets quieter. Modern science describes growth through deliberate practice, practice with precise feedback right at the edge of discomfort, not just pleasant repetition. Script, not magic, not talent, the geometry of effort. Musashi started giving feedback that made you want to howl. Elbow a finger's width lower. Heel slightly inward. Don't lift your shoulder. If you lift it, you're searching for ease. Renziro protested. It's barely noticeable. Exactly, Musashi answered. Mastery is almost always invisible. Only mistakes are obvious. On day 40, Musashi suddenly gave him a different object, a heavy oar. Do the same strike. Renziro could barely lift it. And then he understood. Form is not beautiful movement. Form is the language of the body. If the language is weak, you won't be able to speak with force when you need to. He did 100 strikes with the oar and felt the desire to impress vanish. Only work remained. That evening he heard his friends again. You'll lose your youth. And for a second he got scared. What if discipline is just refusing life? He came to Musashi with that fear, and Musashi said, a life without discipline is not a life, it's drift. But for Renziro to understand it for real, he had to fall. And that fall was already coming. Chapter 6. 0 is forbidden. Musashi didn't say, be perfect. He said, don't make holes. You think discipline is 100%, Musashi said. No, discipline is continuity. A river can get thin, but if it stops, it's no longer a river. It's a memory of a river. Renziro asked, what if I'm sick? What if it's a holiday? What if I'm called to work? Musashi answered calmly. Then you do less, but you do it. 1 strike, 10, 100, but not 0. On day 35, Renziro caught a cold. His throat burned, his head throbbed. His mind whispered, skip today. You've earned rest. He came to the river anyway, did 10 strikes, slow, and left. His friends laughed. You're sick and still swinging a stick. You're crazy. Musashi heard it and said, when they call you crazy for your steadiness, you're close. Normal people get normal results. There's an important thing about habits. Real-life studies show behavior change is uneven, but regularity and returning are critical. You used to break not from a slip, but from the story after the slip. Since I slipped, it's over. The fall came as a festival. The town celebrated. Lanterns, songs, the smell of fried fish, cheap sake. Renziro promised himself, I'll just look. He even did 1,000 strikes that morning and thought he had earned a little. By evening he was laughing louder than everyone. He drank, ate, talked, and somewhere deep inside he felt the old Renziro returning like a thief who knows the locks. At night, Staggering, he reached home and collapsed on the floor without doing his 3 threshold strikes. A gap. In the morning, shame hit him, and the old logic switched on. If there's a gap, it's all destroyed, so I might as well quit. Renziro went to the river and stood there, not moving. Musashi looked at him and didn't say a single reproach. "How many strikes?" he asked only. "0, Renziro whispered. Musashi nodded as if he'd heard ordinary weather. "Then today you'll do one. Right now. 1 strike, slow, correct." "See?" Musashi said. "You don't return to discipline when the shame becomes smaller. You return the second you realize you stepped away." And for the first time, Renziro felt relief. Discipline isn't a prison, it's a path back. But right here, discipline meets what breaks even strong people. Randomness. And if you don't have answers prepared in advance, you'll start bargaining again. The next chapter is about pre-decided decisions. Chapter 7. Pre-decided decisions. One day Musashi brought a scroll and said, "Today you won't write philosophy. You'll write your weaknesses." Musashi pointed at the sand. "Name 3 reasons you used to relapse." Renziro listed them. "Holidays, exhaustion after work, friends who drag me into drinking." Musashi nodded. "Now for each reason, you write a response. Not think later, now." He made Renziro write, 1. If it's a holiday, I do 100 strikes before the holiday, and in the evening, 3 strikes at the threshold. Ainwa, because in chaos your mind chooses the easiest path, and your discipline must live not in strong days, but in bad days. Modern planning research calls this implementation intentions. If X happens, I will do Y. That kind of pre-made decision increases action because the choice is already made before stress. Musashi said the same thing without science. You don't fight at the moment of attack. You fight at the moment of preparation. Musashi made Renziro rehearse a bad day in advance. Imagine you wake up and your nose is bleeding. Imagine an official arrives demanding urgent work. Imagine your mother gets sick. What will you do? Musashi cut him off. "No, those are thoughts. Give me an action. 1 action, minimum, but inevitable." That's how another rule appeared. The minimal protocol. If the day is wrecked, 10 strikes. If the day is broken, 3 threshold strikes. If the day is ash, 1 strike. But correct. "That's ridiculous," Renziro said. "Excellent," Musashi answered. "What saves a life often looks ridiculous at the start." And right after that, Musashi led him to a place Renziro never wanted to go, the local militia training ground. There were people stronger, more experienced, meaner. There were eyes. "Today you will train among those who will judge you," Musashi said, "because discipline doesn't die from pain. It dies from shame." Renziro walked in and felt his heart trying to run away. But he did his strike. Then another. And he saw. Shame is just a sensation. It doesn't kill. Only surrender to it kills. But the real exam still hadn't begun. Chapter 8. Destroying Dependencies. The next day the river water was icy. Renziro stepped in up to his knees and felt his muscles clamp from the cold. He raised the sword. His hands shook. "Look," Musashi said, "here is your real enemy. Not laziness, not lack of talent. Your enemy is dependency." He spoke about a principle of strategy. Don't attach yourself to perfect conditions or one only correct way. If your strength depends on an ideal gym, an ideal mood, an ideal day, that isn't strength. That's rent. Renziro kept striking while his teeth chattered. And suddenly he understood. When conditions are bad, the mind can't hold long negotiations. It's forced to act shorter. The cold cut off the chatter. Musashi ordered Renziro to do 3 deletions. 1. Delete extra talking in the morning. And Renziro felt resistance stronger than the cold. Because this wasn't about the strike. This was about taking away familiar comfort. Musashi spoke of his school as if it were not a story but a warning. 2 swords isn't a cool style. It's a principle. Don't cling to one way. If your sword is taken, you must not lose yourself. Renziro understood that this applied to everything. Sleep taken, mood taken, support taken. If discipline disappears along with it, then discipline wasn't in you. Musashi made one more deletion. He forbade Renziro from complaining. "Complaint is a prayer for weakness," he said. "You say it to get permission to quit." By day 90, Renziro noticed. There were fewer words in his head. He spoke shorter, thought shorter, acted faster. And this wasn't speed, it was clarity. But it's exactly in clarity that people relapse most often. Because it feels like, that's it, I'm different now, I can relax. Musashi heard it before Renziro even said it. "Relaxation is not rest," Musashi said. "Relaxation is loss of vigilance. And in strategy it's called opening a crack after victory." He paused. "Tomorrow we'll check whether you have cracks." Chapter 9. Day 105. Day 105 didn't arrive like a duel in the square. It arrived like a letter. A messenger brought a sealed scroll. Renziro's father had to urgently travel to a timber supplier, which meant leaving the workshop without hands. If the father went, the family would lose a contract. If he didn't go, they'd lose reputation. Renziro had to finish the work alone in 3 days, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the old voice. "Well, now isn't the time for training. You'll catch up later." Renziro looked at his father, at his mother, at the empty storage, and he understood. This is the real battle. Not sword against sword, but commitment against circumstances. He came to the river in his iron hour. His hands ached from work. Sleep pressed on his eyes. He did 10 strikes and stopped. His mind said, "See, even 10 is good. Go work." And then he remembered everything. Discipline isn't volume. It's continuity. A pre-made decision is a shield. 0 is forbidden. He did the 11th. Then the 12th. By the 50th strike, his body switched on. By the 100th, his breathing leveled out. By the 200th, his mind went quiet. He did 1,000, and he went to work. For 3 days, he barely slept. He did strikes before dawn, worked until night, did 3 threshold strikes, and collapsed. On the 2nd day, friends came to pull him into helping at the festival, and to laugh. He refused. They said, "You think you're better than us?" Renziro didn't answer, because inside an answer there is always a desire to justify yourself. That same night, a fight started in the town. Drunk mercenaries harassed a woman by a stall. People walked around. Renziro heard the shouting and felt his body wanting to do what it used to do. Freeze. And then he noticed there was no bargaining. Fear was there, but negotiations were not. He stepped forward and said loudly, "Enough." One of the mercenaries turned, spat. "Who are you?" Renziro wasn't a great fighter, but he was a man who made 1,000 correct strikes every morning. He didn't attack. He stood the way he stood by the river. Steady, low, no show. The mercenary lunged, and Renziro delivered one short strike with a wooden staff lying by the wall. No anger, no "prove it," just an answer. The mercenary recoiled. The strike landed on the wrist. The weapon fell. The second mercenary saw it and backed off. The fight ended faster than it began. Renziro was shaking, but not from fear. From the realization, discipline had moved from mourning into the moment. At dawn, he came to Musashi wanting to tell it like a heroic tale. But Musashi said, "Don't tell it. It's not a heroic tale. It's a consequence. Consequences don't need applause. They need continuation." And only after that, Musashi said, "Now it's time for you to learn emptiness." Renziro understood. The true test wasn't the fight. The true test was not becoming dependent on a new pride. Chapter 10. The emptiness you remain in. The next day, Musashi came without a sword. "Today you stop counting," he said. "But how will I know I'm moving forward?" "You want marks?" Musashi answered. "Because your ego loves proof. But the highest level of discipline doesn't rest on proof. It rests on the absence of alternatives." He told a parable about a tree. A tree doesn't try to be a tree. It just grows, and branches don't argue with roots. Musashi gave Renziro 3 bans. 1. Don't tell anyone the number of days. Why? Because while you train for a reward, you are a slave. Only when practice becomes your mode of existence are you free. That evening, Renziro did his 1,000 strikes and felt no triumph. He just did it. And something strange happened. Friends began to avoid him. Not because he became arrogant, but because next to him their excuses sounded louder. His father said, "You've become too serious." Renziro wanted to explain, wanted to soften it. But Musashi stopped him. "Don't smooth it over. Don't protect their comfort. Your consistency is a mirror. People don't like mirrors." When Musashi left, he didn't leave Renziro a checklist. He left a question. Who are you when nobody is watching? And Renziro understood that discipline is the answer to that question, repeated 1,000 times. Months passed. Renziro no longer felt like a man holding on. He felt like a man for whom keeping his word is as natural as breathing. And one day that same boy from the bridge, the old man's son, saw Renziro by the river. He stood and watched. "You, every day?" he asked. Renziro nodded. The boy went quiet, then said, "Then I will too." That's how discipline is passed correctly. Not by lectures, but by example. Now a question for you. If you made it this far, it means you're tired of endless attempts too. It means you want to become a person who keeps their word. Take the first step the way Renziro did. Choose one discipline ritual, the smallest, but daily. 1. Write it in the comments as a public declaration. And start tomorrow in your iron hour. Because the discipline that scares people isn't built by motivation, it's built by subtraction. And every day is one small operation on your weakness. Subscribe, hit like, and write. What will you delete first? An excuse, a dependency, or an escape route? If you watched to the end, thank you. See you in the next video. And remember, be present, walk with honor, follow the path,